welcome to geNEOusChats once again, and great to be back. And to this week, we've got special guest Marc Hammana. It's a pleasure to have you with us. For the people in our network, would you mind just telling just a short summary about what it is that you do?
All right. So maybe first of all, a little bit about myself. So my name is Marc Hammana. I was born in Paris from a Lebanese father, a Dutch-Spanish mother. I grew up in Paris and afterwards lived in the Netherlands. Traveled around the world much for work and for pleasure, and found my home in Barcelona, which is the city where I live today. And in the professional area, I focus on leadership development, team development, and international business skills. And within leadership, especially, is how to get the most out of diversity rather than only focusing on the numbers. It's really about how to make diversity work, how to utilize the power of diversity to reach better decisions, more creativity, more innovation. That's what I focus on.
This stuff is fascinating, especially in the area of team building. And just to kind of get more out of this, I wanted to ask just a very sort of short question, which is what exactly is it that diversity means to you in the context of what you work with?
Diversity to me means first of all acknowledging the fact that we are the same in many ways and we are different in many ways, and respecting those differences, but also utilizing these differences rather than trying to make everybody the same and see the same. Is really that's where the crossroad of creativity really lies, in diverse opinions. However, diverse opinions, if you have differences, it also leads to friction often. If you just look at the news, look at the world around us, different values, different opinions, different worldviews automatically leads to disagreement often, if not well managed. And I believe that is the role of leadership, to effectively manage this diversity and ensure that friction leads to results rather than to breaking down the harmony within a group.
So in that sense, you would focus on the leadership angle rather than things like the organizational culture per se. You would work really with leadership about how do you build those skills to use diversity as an asset to bring out everyone.
I believe it starts and it ends indeed with leadership. To build an organizational culture, you need to focus on the leaders first of all. They play the most important role within the organizational culture, I believe, especially nowadays. In times of people working from home, all organizations, their eyes and ears are their leaders, because they don't get to see their employees anymore on a daily basis. They don't get to walk up to people's desks and to check in and get an idea of how people are doing. It's through the leaders that this is done.
Well, it's interesting you bring that point up, and it's now I know you're based in Barcelona, and I spent 10 years working in Barcelona, and I did find quite a pervasive tendency towards presenteeism in, I'm not even going to say leadership, but management really there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Spain is not the only place for sure. In terms of working with leaders, I mean, at what point do you feel people are ready to work on this? Because of course you have to meet people where they are. No, you can't simply, I mean, I guess you go through some kind of vetting before you can establish whether or not this is actually going to be worthwhile working together, or how do you do that?
You mean how do I select the people that I actually work with?
Yeah.
Well, of course, indeed, I'm quite selective in who I do work with and who I don't work with. Of course, there has to be a certain openness to first of all, also be critical about yourself on what do you need to change as a leader, because ultimately that's where it starts. Anytime that I how to say, get a question from, okay, within my team there are these and these problems, one of my first questions is, and what is your role into having created this problem and keeping it alive? Because ultimately it's about the dynamic between the leader and his or her team, which creates either success or problems. It's not only I often work with leaders who start with the first conversation by saying, yeah, this and this and this needs to change in my team. But if they're not willing to look in the mirror, into the mirror, and say, okay, what do I need to change these dynamics within my team, then we won't go anywhere, because it's ultimately about both.
Yeah, some very challenging conversations, I'm sure,
Yeah,
especially at the beginning.
especially at the beginning. It's, of course, it's difficult to how to say, the person who hires you, who contracts you, to at some point also tell them you're part of the problem. It's a very fine line,
Yes.
and how to do that diplomatically, but of course, that's definitely an important point. Yeah.
But this comes back to Mark. I mean, what you say on even on your LinkedIn summary, what you're describing is there's a coherence between what you're what you're trying to help bring out in others
Mm-hmm.
and what you're actually doing in your professional practice. Because the one thing that you mention very clearly is purpose. And so
Mm-hmm.
if your sense of purpose is to get the best out of each individual that's inherent in them, then of course you can't shy away from those difficult conversations. And I wonder, just to build on that, when you talk about leading from purpose, how do you get there and how do you stay there?
How do you get to leading from purpose, and how do you stay in leading from purpose? Well, of course, it starts with having more insight into you as a person, knowing about your personal history, where what were the most challenging moments in your life? What did you learn from them? Which decisions did you take at these challenging moments in your life? How do they define you? But also, what were the most successful moments in life, and what brought you to these moments? So it's purpose. It's also your identity and the roles that you play in life, professionally, but also personally. These roles define you as a leader. In the end, personally and professionally is very closely related. The problem, if you experience certain problems at work, it's very likely that you will experience these same problems in your private life, right?
Yeah.
Uh, uh, from there, also the values and beliefs that define you as a leader, and staying true to those. So that is ultimately on a personal level. And then the question is, how do you translate these to a team? How do you stay true to yourself while still adapting to your surroundings and to the people you interact with?
Mhm.
Uh, and I believe it's like being invited somewhere. You stay yourself, but you adapt to the local norms and rules, and you try maybe to learn the local language in order to better connect with people, right?
Yeah,
But that doesn't mean that you're not staying true to yourself.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the words like integration are often misunderstood as
Mm-hmm.
well. The difference between
Exactly.
integration and assimilation is there's a clear difference there.
Exactly.
Um, there's a kind of an interesting connection between the processes here. I mean, if you're working with leaders to
Mm-hmm.
first of all, I mean, it's inward bound first of all, isn't it? It's like,
That's where it starts. Yeah.
what are my values? What's
Mm-hmm.
important to me? What have I learned? Like you're talking about reflective practice on the experiences in your life, both
Mm-hmm.
positive and challenging. Um, in terms of moving that towards the team, I mean, how, are these two separate kind of lines of work that you do, or how are you able to shift from when you get sort of the breakthrough moment within the leadership to then move to, okay, if you found this out about yourself, what about,
Mm-hmm.
and you extend that empathy to your team and imagine all of these processes within these unique individuals.
Right.
And if you found that this process gave you strength, can you imagine that this could be the same for your team? Is that the way you cross the bridge, or do you kind of align those two processes simultaneously?
Ultimately, if you're unable to lead yourself, then you also won't be able to lead others. And the process of leading yourself ultimately is very similar to how to lead others. Ultimately, as human beings, we're driven by two forces. It's acquiring more pleasure and avoiding pain. Right? These are the two, and of course, the model of carrot and the stick is very outdated. However, these two driving forces as human beings, that's what what motivates us to change. So if you know how to lead yourself, and you know these mechanisms for yourself, and you know your shadow sides and what triggers you into ineffective behavior, that it will automatically help you be more effective in interactions with others.
Mhm.
Right? It's about being aware of these processes rather than reacting without awareness.
So would you say that, I mean, if you're working with a leader now, of course the objective at the end is, if this leader has got to a point where, as you say, they can lead themselves and understood
Mm-hmm.
and internalized the idea that, okay, now I am able to more effectively lead others. Do you find that that process, I mean, is it sort of metacognitive? Do you kind of do you sort of think aloud about the process or draw attention to the process by which they're going through this, so they can then apply that to their team? Because how do they, understanding about yourself is one thing, but learning how to bring out the best through diversity in your team as a leader is surely another thing.
Let me give you an example. Indeed, is a process that I use a lot is that of Marshall Goldsmith. I don't know if you've heard of him. The practice of feed forward. And one of the first things I ask leaders to do is to first of all get in touch with your team and ask them, what is a quality that defines me as a leader, that brought me where I am today? And the second question is, what is a behavior despite which I am where I am today, right? We all have qualities that brought us where we are, and there are certain behaviors despite which we have still gotten there, right? It's not only about learning new things, it's also about unlearning certain things, certain ineffective things. This process of collecting improvement focus areas from your team and then following up in your team on how can I actually improve that. Once you know that this is what I want to improve, you also have to get ideas, actionable ideas on how am I actually going to realize a change. Okay. Once you have started working on this change, you need to check in with your team every now and then. How am I doing? To which extent am I displaying the new behavior that I promised to display? And ultimately, that defines your success as a leader. This process for a leader is ultimately the same for a team. Within a team that's not functioning, where there's a lack of trust, where there's a lack of being able to communicate openly about sensitive topics, where people don't give each other feedback, where they close off meetings without clear decisions, all these typical problems that may exist in a team uh, ultimately come down to the same thing. Team members asking each other, what is a quality that I bring to the team and what is something that I can change for the good of our team? This and proactively following up with each other on these improvement focus areas and measuring progress. It's like Kaizen, right? Kaizen is the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement. It's a little by little every time steps forward, but you have to do it with your environment, with your ecosystem. So I believe leadership development as well as team development is not only focusing on one person, it's about the whole ecosystem.
Now, interestingly, mentioning Kaizen, and that kind of incremental, almost iterative development, and particularly, as you say, in keeping with your environment, which is always fluid, and we can never make assumptions about what is two steps ahead, especially in today's world. I mean, it's just crazy.
Right.
Um, everything you're describing to me sounds like the ideal container for, or framework for education,
Right.
for learning. But yet, it's so what I want, without me kind of preempting your answer here. To
Mm-hmm.
what extent does your own sort of education, formal education, reflect this process? Where did all of this insight and knowledge into what learning really is and how effective it is? Where did you get that? Was it from formal education? If not, why not? And where did this come into things?
Well, of course, in my own experiences, I've made many mistakes, and I think that's the only way to become an expert at things, right? It's by making lots of mistakes. In my own experiences as in managing teams and in my own personal development, you have to if you haven't, let's say, experienced these problems yourself, then it's very difficult to translate that to someone else. So where I have my experience from is working with people, and it's of course also my own journey in life and dealing with my own diversity. For example, I mean, if I told you very shortly about my own background, as you can imagine, it might also be it is sometimes also a little bit an inner conflict between the Lebanese part and the Dutch part. How do I deal with these opposites, right? I think also in terms of my hobbies are also as diverse as can be, from Vipassana meditation, for example, and Stoicism, which are more reflective and things. On the other side, Muay Thai, Krav Maga, motorcycles. I mean, it's a much more adrenaline type of thing, right? These are also, again, extremes. So how to deal with extremes? I believe it's our models nowadays tend to be half logics. So we're saying, are you task oriented or are you people oriented? Are you introvert or are you extrovert? Ultimately, the question is, what your question asking here, breathing in or breathing out. It's not just breathing in or breathing out. And that's what organizations struggle with, leaders struggle with. Should we focus on the long term? Should we focus on the short term? Should we centralize or decentralize? It's not about one or the other. It's about maneuvering in between these two.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. I think that the mentality of everything fitting into a box. I mean, it starts really when in education. You know, you've got these kind of assessment types, these summative assessments, um, that we expect the people to demonstrate certain things on a certain day at a certain time of our choosing and not their choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mentality continues. You know, it's almost like everything is designed for the convenience of reporting and not the reality of the world. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
that seems to be a very dangerous mentality in a volatile, uncertain world where you know when things shift, and you can see it. You could see it in the pandemic. You know,
Mm-hmm.
some individuals, teams, or organizations were ready to thrive. They pivoted. They rolled with it. They had the flexible structures in place,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to just see a way forward. You know, whereas others just kind of chasing their tail. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
on
like what you're saying. What you're saying in the area of diversity and inclusion, I think that's for many organizations also what's happening. Just measuring how many people of this group do we have, how many people of this group do we have, but ultimately, I believe it's not about that. It's not about only diversity. It's really about inclusion and the experience of feeling excluded. We all have had that experience at some point in our lives, right? We all have felt at some point that we weren't being invited to the party, that we weren't allowed to play with these other people. So that's where the conversation needs to start. I think it's about inclusivity. It's not about only measuring how many people we have this group, how many people that group. No, I actually like. There's a TED talk on. I think it's the chief diversity officer of eBay, who has a very beautiful TED talk about this, about humanizing diversity and inclusion. And this is one of his points. Really, that's where we need to start the conversation. And if you talk about leadership and how to translate this to your team, that's where it starts. It's about every leader realizing that also I have felt excluded at certain points in my life, and that's what if that's the starting point for creating an inclusive team or being an inclusive leader.
you're straying into the area of vulnerability there, which is
Yeah.
kind of an emerging thing in a way in well I mean the business world it's very tricky, isn't it? Because you're dealing with ego,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
yeah, in a big way.
that's a big word, the E word, indeed. That's what
Yeah,
it's all about.
yeah, and it's very difficult. I mean, it's one thing to very gently introduce the concept that hey, maybe before going like this, you should try this first and explore that.
Exactly.
I mean, that's difficult enough, but then I mean, the conversation you're kind of simulating there about here a leader saying here are times when I felt excluded. Um, I could see a lot of resistance there from leaders. I've seen it in working with different groups of people, and you see the way that people behave when the hierarchies are mixed and
Yeah.
people are less willing to break rank and show themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like, besides vulnerability, I like the word of self-disclosure.
Hmm.
And self-disclosure for me is really indeed opening up to the world around you, and sharing indeed your doubts and your fears and all these things. And ultimately, I think that's what needs to happen more, because the I say that often the teams that I work with, where there's, as we said, like a lack of trust, a lack of clear decisions, no more feedback, their problem often is that they have been avoiding these crucial conversations for way too long. If this is what you call undercurrent, right? If you, something bothers you about the behavior of someone else, or you feel excluded by someone else's way of acting, and you don't express that at the moment in a constructive way, if you keep it inside, ultimately this will affect the relationship. So it's about having these conversations, these crucial conversations, and clearing the air right away, rather than letting this negative energy sink down into the water. I would like to give the metaphor of a fish, right? Every time that this happens, it's a fish in the water. If you let that fish just swim around in the water, it starts eating, it becomes a bigger fish. At some point, it becomes a shark, and this shark undermines the effectiveness of the team. It undermines the relationships within the team, and ultimately, after a while, that's where someone like me has to come in to help solve these problems. I believe a lot of problems can be solved if we just would open up a little bit more to each other, and indeed we're able to put our egos aside every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's where true empathy really begins, doesn't it? When there's when there's not a barrier there. I mean, you mentioned the word unlearning earlier on, and it does seem like there's so much of that. It's a shame that, I mean, unlearning at a certain level in terms of cognitive flexibility is very healthy, because we're constantly iterating, we're constantly discovering that, okay, I thought this was the way it is, and now it turns out it's like this, and you've got to be adaptable to that. But in a more systemic sense, it's difficult that people are going through, they're getting to the stage of unfortunately sometimes the stage of crisis before they work with coaching and things like this, which is
Yeah,
really unfortunate to leave it that long. And often what they seem to be doing is they have to unlearn um, social cultures and organizational cultures that told them that you have a home persona and a work persona, and
mm-hmm.
those two don't mix, and you can't bring your authentic self to work. And then if you can't bring your authentic self to work, or even in the home sometimes too, how can you possibly expect to connect to anyone else? And if that wall is up, I can't imagine you will ever really see um, that the authentic selves around you in your group, um, which seems like a huge waste of, I mean, talent, if you want to put it very superficially, but maybe potential, really.
Yeah, and a lot, and a waste of energy. I mean, how much energy does it cost to behave and to pretend to be someone else, that you're someone that you're not?
Yeah,
How worn out do you end your days if you have been acting, having to put on a mask all day? I mean,
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
yeah,
And perhaps people don't realize they're carrying that weight until they shed it.
exactly,
So it
exactly.
must be very
We come
rewarding.
to social conditioning is ultimately where we come to, and it's like this. I like the metaphor of social conditioning in terms of we're all drops in this big Amazon river, and we're just floating along with the water, and we don't even see the sides anymore. But if we want to change something, then first of all we have to realize that we're in that river, and swimming against the current is quite difficult, right? It's
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if you've, in your interest in Vipassana meditation, if you read Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse.
I know Herman Hesse. I didn't read this
Yeah.
book.
I'd recommend it. And the metaphor you gave
Write
me there
that
is
down.
very much like the metaphor of the boatman, who's he's working with the young Siddhartha, uh,
Uh-huh.
and showing him that the surface of the river may appear to be um, you know uh, calm, but underneath it's that there's two kind of currents,
Exactly.
and things are everything and nothing at the same time. And it's an amazing metaphor that he's not ready for the first time he's there, but on his
Hmm.
second journey finally makes sense. And I think that unfortunately people are in their 30s and 40s and later until they actually start figuring this stuff out. And
Yeah.
so my next question to you is really about how do we do it? How do we get generations of the future? So my niece is 16 years old,
Mhm.
and already I can see the world telling her to be a certain way, and there's not enough voices around her to say you don't have to do that. Education, her schooling is certainly not helping it.
Hmm.
We're moving people through standardized, regimented tests. Um, what are we going to do about that? How do we help people get there earlier? Any ideas?
Wow, big question, Mark. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but uh, it's indeed what you said. It's indeed sad that we start working on these themes at an age where we've let a few decades of these things build up, right? If we would be able to start at a much younger age on knowing really what gives us energy, what costs us energy, and knowing more about who we are, what triggers us, what we find important in life, and ultimately what we consider to be a good lived life, a well lived life, right?
Mhm,
To begin with the end in mind. What do we want to get out of life? Then we would be able to solve so much of the things that we need to work with people on later on in life, right? So, but I believe there are a few beautiful initiatives. I believe there's I heard the school Learn Life. You ever heard about this?
yes, yes, we work with them actually.
You work with them, yeah.
Yeah, we know them very well.
Good. Well, so I believe there are many. I believe this school is essential
Hmm.
is essential here in how we condition young people at these crucial ages.
Hmm.
Yeah. So to be honest, it's not a domain of expertise of mine, but I believe the essence of it would be starting much earlier with the things that we do in a professional context at a later age, but to start at a much younger age.
Which seems to be, if I've got the theme right, that's kind of running through this, is it's almost a practice of letting go,
Hmm.
trying not to control and not to fit everything into boxes and Excels, um,
Yeah.
and have a more iterative approach, well, a more fluid
Which
approach.
is really indeed what we are as human beings. We're conditioned and programmed to put things in boxes, right?
Yeah,
Continuously.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, for convenience of processing. And
Yeah. Otherwise, we have to figure out the world every day from
yeah,
scratch. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I understand as well that there are certain neurological factors. I mean, we can't really expect people to completely understand themselves 100% before their prefrontal cortex is developed at 25 years old or whatever. I mean, I understand there's people are not going to be 10 years old and saying I know exactly what I want from life, but at least creating the space
I
around
find that
it.
interesting what you're saying now. I have the feeling actually that most of us at a young age, perhaps at 10 years old, but a little bit later, we often tend to know better what we want out of life than later on in life. Because later on in life, there have been so many layers of social conditioning over it, and people telling us this would be good for you and this would not be good for you, and this is what we expect of you, and this would make us very happy if you did that.
Hmm.
And this, yeah. So I think it's actually, yeah. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, I think that there's definitely something in that we say to kids have a reaction to something, and we say it's because they don't know how the world is, as if they've yet to learn, and the way the world is the right thing.
Hmm.
It's as you say, to trust that innate reaction to something
Yeah.
as well. I
Yeah.
mean, kids don't want, they want to play, they want to discover
Yeah.
things themselves. They don't want to sit in a classroom with somebody reading something from a projector or a PowerPoint or whatever. I mean,
Exactly.
and they know that, and we tell them, well, this is the way the world is, as if they have to
Yeah.
conform. It's
Exactly. Yeah.
it's
I
not.
remember this. It actually triggers a memory of a conversation. I think it was my first job, and I saw within that first job, I saw many things that could have done better, right? In my own naivete, no. But I remember indeed speaking with my boss about it and sharing all these ideas. And we should do this, we should do that. And at some point, he said, "Well, Mark, I see indeed there you're still young and very enthusiastic, and you think that you can change the world, but you'll see later on in life that it doesn't work that way. You'll become more realistic as years go by. And I thought, wow, how sad. I hope that I will never become like that. I
Yeah. Yeah.
I never want to be a realist like that, because it's like, yeah. But ultimately, time does indeed
Yeah.
narrow your vision in terms of possibilities.
Yeah, I absolutely resonate with that experience, and I've had similar experiences as well, where I've been sitting down to working and being told, oh, we're going to make your contract permanent, and there you go, you've got a job for life,
Yeah,
and
woohoo!
I'm smiling and thinking, don't think so.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
want
mean,
that. Exactly.
you know, yeah,
Yeah,
we never know, what's around the corner, of course. So yeah.
that's right.
Well, you've said a lot of really interesting things, Marc, and it's been inspirational to hear. I'm just really always enthusiastic, always grateful to know there are people out there like yourself fighting the good fight. Um,
Doing what we can. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's great. Do you find you must find that your work feels rewarding and purposeful? No, are there are there moments where you think I'm just not making the impact I want to? Is there, these challenges or
I I uh, I I feel that I'm one of the lucky few that I can say really I would do this work even if I wouldn't get paid for it. That's
yeah,
definitely. And I've experienced moments in my career where that was very different, where my work cost me a lot of energy, and
yeah,
but I feel that every interaction, of course, you don't always get the results that you want. Every interaction, every team, every leader is different. So you never know what it's gonna bring. Life's like a box of chocolates, as how was the name again?
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump would say. But I do feel my work is very rewarding. The impact that I'm able to make on people and on really unifying people. I believe if in terms of purpose, this is really what I see as my purpose. Really unifying people and turning differences into strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems like and you mentioned how the differences can be conflictive or they can be strengthening, and of course the difference
Exactly.
is in the leader, no?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think also for me, we talked about this in the beginning of this conversation. How does it connect to your personal history? Lebanon, of course, a country maybe that you know with 18 official beliefs, which has been uh, uh, it's one big disaster. It's one big disaster. People fighting with each other over different beliefs and different truths on the world. I live in Barcelona, and of course also here between Catalonia and Spain. Again, different worldviews, different histories. Just look around the world; it just happens everywhere, and it's sad to see. I think it's so sad to see that rather than having a constructive conversation and trying to understand what's important to the other person, to the other party, and finding solutions that work for everyone. They exist. I'm sure they always exist. The only thing that we have to do is to actively listen to each other, try to understand each other, and work constructively rather than blaming each other and always think about any conversation that you might have had with a partner, right? If you're in a fight with your partner and they start bringing out their photographic memory of all the errors that you made in the past, and then nothing happens. You don't move forward, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So I think that's really the essence. And in terms of what brings me joy and purpose, and what I makes me happy is being able to unify people, really resolving conflict where I can, and turning that into a constructive atmosphere, which produces results.
amen to that. That's fantastic.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Thank
Amen.
you, Marc. I'm feeling
Cheers.
I'm feeling energized by talking to you, actually.
Thanks, Mark. Really
And
enjoyed
thank
our
you
conversation.
so much for your time. And we'll be sure to link to the talk actually that you mentioned as well. And I think this is a topic we definitely need to come back to. I'm definitely interested in digging more into creative and purposeful leadership and diversity as a strength. I seem to remember Julius Caesar. I think it was in the Third Gallic Wars, the book that he wrote. He wrote it in the third person for some reason, but it was actually him that wrote it.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "Show me a nation that is not forged in fire, and I'll show you a nation that can be broken." And
Wow.
I've always liked that. That you have to go through that formative process of finding the unification, and then when you do find that on the other side, you're always going to be 10 times as strong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I like what you said before. So you mentioned about crisis. In I believe in Chinese, the symbol for crisis and for opportunity is exactly the same. So in every crisis, there's an opportunity for
Yeah.
growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen it this year.
Yeah, it is indeed.
Some people only saw the first symbol.
Exactly. Yeah. So they will see the other symbol at some point. Sure.
Okay. Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
Mark.
Mark. It's been a pleasure. All the best.
Cheers. Take care. All the best.